Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And it's time for another worst to best ranking. So this was one that I was really looking forward to doing. The Chemical Brothers are not a band that I think need an introduction on this channel. I've already done my discography review on these big beat legends and even did a collab review of their latest album with Mark from Spectrum Pulse. But anyways, this is one band that I really wanted to do specifically a worst to best ranking on. Not because they have a particularly huge back catalog that people would need help navigating, they really don't. And not just because they came out with that new album. I wanted to do this one because I know for a fact that no one is gonna agree on a ranking. The closest thing to a consensus with these guys is that most people are probably going to have at least one of their first three albums in the top 2 or 3 of their ranking. I can't talk with this sore on my tongue. A lot of people are likely going to have those first 3 gathered at the top, but certainly not everyone. And as far as the rest of the catalog is concerned, anything goes, really. Everyone will have their own hot takes regarding this one, and I'm kind of excited to see whatever other variations people have. Any of their 9 albums at this point could theoretically be your number 1 depending on who you ask. Even the ones you don't think would be anyone's number 1. You may be surprised. My own number 1 is far from the most popular pick, but may as well get into it. Disclaimers, of course, that this is just my opinion and you can feel free to disagree with it. It's all ranked on my own personal enjoyments and that's it. And it's liable to change all depending on my mood. I did not design this video to be the most agreeable ranking. There will be a bunch of takes here that go against the grain, but thankfully I am only one person, so it's not like my rankings will have any bearing on what you most enjoy. And I don't actually dislike any of their 9 albums, so keep that in mind too. So without any further ado, let's get right into...
Dance.
The Chemical Brothers, worst to best. At number 9, we have We Are the Night. Yeah, didn't really have to deliberate on this one much, and this isn't even that bad an album, really. Just kind of a mixed bag that sits around decent to above average. The title track and A Modern Midnight Conversation are still fantastic tracks to me even now that rank among the best they've ever done, but there's a lot of instrumentals that don't really stick out to me outside of being their usual fare. Even the better ones like Burst Generator and Dust Spiegel are really not among my favorites of theirs overall. And they don't always sit well next to really off-brand tracks of theirs like Battle Scars or The Pills Won't Help You Now. Not to mention it has 2 of my least favorite Chemicals tracks ever, with the bewilderingly out-of-place, almost comedy track The Salmon Dance, and the personally immensely irritating Do It Again, being really the only track of theirs that's ever gotten under my skin in a bad way. It's so stylistically all over the place and incohesive, it's like they had no path to follow or something. Wait. But okay, even in spite of the lack of cohesion, it's generally one of their riskiest and most off-brand albums, and I gotta give it props for they're trying new things and pushing themselves. For what it's worth, I also don't expect this to be at the bottom of everyone's rankings. Most of the tracks that don't do much for me, I've seen plenty of praise for from other people. I won't expect it to be most people's number 1, but I imagine there's at least a couple of you who would consider it. But yeah, I'm not one of those people. For me, it's always been really all over the place, with just the 2 tracks I mentioned that really resonated with me on a deeper level. It's fine, but the Chemicals can usually do better than this for me. Whoopsh. At number 8, we have Born in the Echoes.
Everything getting harder to find. Everybody jumping out of their mind. Everybody going out.
Time hasn't really been kind to Born in the Echoes. This album came out in a time where I was really itching for something like the Chemical Brothers could really offer, and they delivered here an album that stuck to all their tried and true formulas and did pretty much all of them really well. And for what it's worth, I still enjoy this album from front to back. I don't think there's any duds on it. If you want an album that just bangs, you got one here for sure. Every track goes hard, save for the last couple, which are enjoyable in slightly different ways. The reason why it's not higher though, first of all, this album feels like too much of a retread for me that doesn't do enough to set itself apart as its own thing. It's pretty reliant on the same kinds of sounds explored on albums like Dig Your Own Hole without doing them as well. Second of all, this album completely got overshadowed by its second track for me. Go is by far the best track on here, and nothing else here really resonated with me on that level, despite all of it at least being really fun while it's on. A lot of it can be kind of forgettable for me, and in general it's just kind of become the album with Go on it. Also, sometimes I Feel So Deserted is probably the weakest opener to any Chemicals album to date, so while I'm at it, but whatever. Even if this album has cooled on me a fair bit since 2015, I think it's still a pretty solid effort from them that came at a good time. It's a varied enough listen to not be boring, but cohesive enough to fit together. It's a good album. Far from their best work for me, though. Whoosh. At number 7, I have Exoplanet Dust. Oh dear, this is probably the ranking most likely to piss people off. And believe me, it was the one that took the most deliberation from me. First and foremost, I think it needs to be said that this is probably the one album of theirs that I have the most respect for. Basically being the album to kick off the big beat movement, and become one of the most influential, era-defining releases not just of that genre, but of the entire 90s. One that still holds up as a legend to this day. And it was even my starting point for the Chemicals as well. I remember finding a CD copy at our library near our house, and getting interested in what they had to offer, listening several times, and just kinda not being that wowed by it. I will at least say I definitely get this album a lot more than I did as a kid. The main appeal that's allowed it to hold up as well as it does for so many is its raw grittiness and lack of a commercial pop tinge that would color so many of their later albums. But I always just find it a bit dry and repetitive. It has a bunch of moments that just drag for me, and I think more than anything, I just don't personally care for the tone of distorted guitars that they use here. It just kind of comes off to me as a thin layer of noise in most areas, and they don't sound as good as they could, I don't think. At least not in the version I'm used to. Still, that's not to say it doesn't have its moments. Leave Home and In Dust We Trust use their rock influence to really catchy and hard-hitting effect. Chemical beats his 90s acid at its edgiest and most raw. The kind of thing that is the exact reason for those sounds becoming a cliche and is still an absolute banger to this day. One Too Many Mornings and Alive Alone kind of have a hangover-y feel to them that still has plenty of emotion and melodic flair to it to make me want to come back to those every now and then. All those tracks are still great, and even the rest of them are still at least pretty good. But yeah, I expect most people are gonna have this one ranked a lot higher than I am. And, you know, it's a classic without a doubt, but in terms of my personal enjoyment, they just have a bunch that deliver more for me. That's all. Whoosh. At number 6, we have Come With Us. Yes, I somehow ended up enjoying this more than Exoplanet Dust. I don't know what to tell you. While certainly not an era-defining classic, I think it's pretty widely considered one of their weakest efforts, and I'm not gonna act like I think it's a masterpiece myself. I don't think it has any of their best tracks ever, and there are a couple of standouts like the title track and Star Guitar and Denmark that I enjoy the hell out of pretty much any time I put this on, but none of those are on the same level as the highest points from other albums, higher or lower on this list. But by the same token, back when I reviewed the album, I couldn't decide upon a least favorite. And I still stand by this album at the very least being one of their most consistent projects from a quality standpoint. Anytime I think I have a least favorite, I listen to it again and I change my mind. I don't like the bland vocal performance on The State We're In, but it has some beautiful psychedelia-influenced melodic washes. I may not like the intro of Pioneer Skies very much, but it develops into something really epic later on. I may find long stretches of hoops to be kinda boring, but that main sample keeps coming back and lodging itself in my head. I like nearly all the tracks on here roughly the same amount, and I like the overall spacey and melodic heavy vibe that the whole album carries throughout. I won't blame you if you have it near the bottom of your ranking, and I won't blame you if you even have it higher than I do. They definitely have other albums that resonate with me more strongly and have much more memorable high points. There's not much you can get here that you couldn't already get out of something like Surrender, and the 10 tracks on here don't fit together in the most cohesive way. But I'm not gonna sit here and say I don't still really enjoy this thing from start to finish. Oh, and speaking of which, whoosh, at number 5 we have Surrender. Okay, Surrender. When I was talking to Mark from Spectrum Pulse about their latest album, he mentioned offhand that this album is probably the best place to start if you've never heard a Chemicals album before, and I'm inclined to agree. It shows the beginning of their more melodic tendencies and bringing in a bit of a psychedelic edge that is maybe a tad Beatles-inspired in some parts. It's one of their most accessible releases. It has a bunch of the, really big, obvious, iconic hits like Hey Boy, Hey Girl, and Let Forever Be. And let me tell you, the best stuff on this album is still, life-changingly good to me. Not just the ever-iconic singles I mentioned, but also the beautiful melodic passages of tracks like Got Glint, and don't even get me started on the Sunshine Underground, my god. So now why don't I have this ranked even higher? Well, I kinda consider it to be a big mess as a whole. I don't think Music Response is the strongest of openers, though it is a good opener. I don't think Dream On is the strongest of closers either, kinda drags for me. There's a bunch of other weak spots that aren't really that impactful for me, and I don't often feel a strong urge to listen to out of context. I don't think the 11 tracks on here fit together very well, and it just kind of has the feel of a mixed bag for me. It's not an album that I would typically listen to all in one unbroken piece. I'm usually in the mood to listen to one or two specific tracks, and then I just go straight to them and listen to those out of context. But unlike We Are the Night, the lowest points on this album all still offer some good stuff, and I have no objections to listening to the album in one go and keeping the whole thing on my iPod. And it doesn't hurt that the album kind of has that reputation as the massive influential classic that it is, much like their first two albums. I think most people consider this to be the Chemicals in their prime, and yeah, I agree. This is a classic. I'm probably gonna get people pretty mad that it's not even higher, but and maybe even more so that this just topped it out personal enjoyment-wise. At number 4, we have No Geography. I will freely admit this is the one ranking that's most likely to change in the coming months. Since the album just came out, I do get a bit of a feeling like I'm jumping the gun by saying that I happen to personally enjoy this album more than Surrender right now. I mean, I definitely have a lot more respect and way more nostalgia for Surrender, but this one's just getting the slight edge for me at this current moment because I think it comes together as a whole way better in terms of its structure and the way it flows together, and in general the way that it has a lot more replay value than I ever would have expected. I wouldn't be surprised if I get sick of it in a few months, as most Chemicals albums do, but right now I am still totally enjoying the hell out of this thing, from front to back. When I first heard it, I could probably list 10 different nitpicks I had, from recording fidelity of samples calling attention to themselves on tracks like We've Got to Try and Catching Me I'm Falling and Mad as Hell, to some occasional lyrical moments that sound like they were hinting at political undertones without following through with actually saying anything, to having 2 tracks that just kind of weighed down the momentum with the kind of sluggish gravity drops, and the above-mentioned somewhat underwhelming closer to this thing. And yeah, those 2 tracks still aren't that great to me, but every listen of this thing has progressively made me care less and less about all these nitpicks. The stuff that's good is just that freaking good. The mini-suite of the first 3 tracks makes for an addicting 12-minute journey that starts amazingly and ends in a really satisfying way. Gotta Keep On is one of the most infectious tracks they've put together in years. Free Yourself creates a quirky charm out of many disparate-sounding elements not really blending together, and also including one of the most killer drops on any Chemicals track, with all those loud blaring alarms. And even tracks I initially wasn't hot on turned into highlights. Like The Universe Sent Me, I thought had too many loops of Aurora saying I cave in at the end, but the melodic washes throughout the bulk of the track are too impressive for me to care about that. We've Got to Try has a really weak first drop, but the sample sounds too good and the alternate drop near the end is too satisfying for those gripes to matter now. And the catchiness of Mad as Hell's titular vocal sample, combined with the odd structure and absolutely banging acid-heavy beats, far eclipse that sample initially being too thuddingly on the nose. I just kinda can't believe that the Chemicals made an album this consistently great from start to finish this late into their career. This is the kind of thing I really wish I could see live. I'm really impressed by it across the board, and it's probably my favorite album of 2019 so far. So now that I finally got to verbalize all the other thoughts I had on this that I didn't lose to nervousness in the review proper, let's talk about all the other surprisingly great late period work of theirs. At number 3, we have Further. So like if you took no geography, took out the 2 tracks that threw off the momentum for me, you'd have 8 tracks and basically a totally airtight experience with no bad tracks. Kinda like Further, but then it'd be too short, so yeah, whatever, I'm rambling. Further is just 8 tracks with no filler, and every track hits hard in its own way. It's easily their most cohesive album, and the one I enjoyed the most just from a structural point of view. It's not one that I have particularly complicated thoughts on, but it's all good. From the more laid-back and melodic heavy stuff like Another World and Snow and Wonders of the Deep, to the more spacey banger-type tracks like Escape Velocity and Dissolve, to the stuff in between like K plus D plus B and Swoon. Oh my god, don't even get me started on Swoon. Best track on here by far. It also says something that a track like Horsepower, which is still a pretty solid banger, is also one of my more consistent least favorites on here. And yeah, that's basically all I got. 8 tracks and they're all good if not great. Make sure you don't sleep on this one. At number 2, we have Dig Your Own Hole. Alright, finally, the one classic period album from them that I'm not going to piss people off with a lower than average ranking. All the things that people say they love on Exit Planet Dust totally do it for me here. I don't know why, they're just so much more satisfying this time around. The guitars, the buzzing distortion, just bring so much more of a visceral reaction out of me. And it's plenty varied enough to hold my interest the whole time. They keep finding new and interesting ways to be loud and blown out and in your face and aggressive and raw. Either by being super fast paced and catchy like on the title track in Electrobank, or relying on killer bass lines like those on Block Arc and Beats and Paiku. But there's still time for a couple more melodic and toned down moments like Lost in the K-Hole or Where Do I Begin. And it also has Setting Sun on it, which is probably the most aggressive track that they've ever made, which should really be saying something. Sure, there's still that stretch of tracks from It Doesn't Matter to Get Up on It Like This that still doesn't really do as much for me, especially the former. But that section of the album's still perfectly fine, and the amazingness of the closer, this private psychedelic reel, makes up for any other gripes that I might have with the album. That track just by itself is like a 10 out of 10. Yeah, another era-defining classic like the other 90s Chemicals albums, but this is easily my favorite of their early period stuff, one that I not only respect its long-lasting historical impact, but also just enjoy the hell out of pretty much from front to back. But there was still one more album from them that will always get more of a reaction out of me than even this could. And that album is... Whoosh. At number 1, I have Push the Button. You know, I can certainly understand the people who didn't like this album. First of all, it's a pretty heavy turn towards pop and commercial territory. One could make the argument that they sold out on or something on this album. You could say the album's one attempt at being political, left-right, is not really deep or relevant, and guest rapper Anwar barely even tries to rhyme anything. You could tell me that Close Your Eyes is boring, or Come Inside is immature, or other tracks are really annoying or overly simplistic. You can tell me that the album as a whole does not come together at all beyond being a collection of 11 unrelated tracks. Believe me, I hear ya. I get that it's not for everyone. I just don't actually agree with any of those sentiments. Besides maybe the last one, and even that doesn't really even read to me as a major problem because I enjoy the hell out of all 11 tracks. Close Your Eyes is their best poppy chill track or whatever you want to call it, probably ever, with fantastic hooks and melodies and a beautiful atmosphere. Hold Tight London is also really good in that vein. Left Right bangs super hard and has the kind of music I'd like to soundtrack the political revolution they had in mind. And Anwar totally sells that anti-war message. I like that they do have a diss track that takes a solid stance on the issue, I mean... And that's also not including the quirky instrumentals like Marvo Ging or near instrumentals like The Big Jump and Come Inside that also hit really hard, or the way more obvious singles like Galvanize and The Boxer and Believe that are way too easy to shout or sing along with, or the fabulously uplifting ending Surface to Air. Even my least favorite track, Shake, Break, Bounce, has kind of a quirky charm to it and a catchy hook that I enjoy. This album is just totally airtight as far as I'm concerned. Not a single weak track in the bunch, and of course it's also easily the Chemicals album I've listened to the most. Even when I'm not really in the mood for other albums of theirs, this one would always keep bringing me back over and over, and I will continue to defend it to the ends of the earth if I have to. At no point during my deliberation over this ranking did I question this album's spot. Push the Button always has been and likely always will be my favorite album from these guys. And yeah, I will leave it at that. But of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me a review of something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time. All the things that people say they love on Exoplanetus